All right. So our first speaker today is named Dr. Ben Park. He has his MD, PhD, and an awesome background there, I see. Thank you, Ben. So he is a professor of medicine here at Vanderbilt University and is the interim director of hematology and oncology. And I'll let him do the rest of the introduction. Much of this time is you getting to know the people behind the science. So he's going to spend some time talking through his background. So thank you so much, Ben, for being here.
Thank you so much, Beth. And I'm going to share my screen here. I think we've all become Zoom experts during this pandemic. Can you all see that?
Looks
Excellent.
good to me.
Yeah.
Start. All right, here we go. So I'm going to try to make up some time because I was supposed to be done by 12:30ish. And hopefully there'll be time for a question or two. So I'm not going to do a huge intro because that's kind of what this is about. I was charged to kind of give you all insights into what led me down a pathway of doing MD, PhD, and biomedical research, and in particular oncology. And so many of you who have done cancer research as an undergrad or high school or even beyond as an intern or as a gap year who have worked in cancer realize that when I say hits in cancer, what we're really talking about genetic or genomic alterations of which the accumulation will lead to cancer. But it occurred to me that life often parallels the evolution of cancer. I know that sounds kind of maybe mean or weird or macabre, but bear with me and I think you'll understand what I mean. So clonal evolution is a concept that was really put forth by a gentleman named Dr. Peter Knoll back in 1976. Actually, it was two people, Knoll and Hungerford, and they're really credited with this kind of understanding of what cancer is and how it evolves from normal cells. And that is, if you have normal cells depicted here in the green, there's some sort of genetic damage or hit. That by itself is not enough to cause cancer, but it leads to some sort of selective growth advantage or clonal expansion. And then when you multiply those numbers, then it takes any one of those cells to get a second hit. And then there's another wave of clonal expansion. So it probably takes about 3 to 8 hits, if you will, for a normal cell to become a cancer. And that's likely why most cancers are in the 5th and 6th decade of life. Because remember, this is a process that happens over time. You have to clonally expand a group of cells that for somehow have become immortal. And this is usually why in pediatric populations, cancer isn't, thankfully, that common. But sometimes those are the exceptions to the rule where you can just have one big hit that leads to the evolution of a cancer. All right, so my life, as you will see, parallels this kind of clonal evolution, and you'll understand when I get to there. So yes, it was actually my birthday on Saturday. I'm now 53, if you can do the math very quickly. And I was actually born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is right here. For those of you who are only of the internet age, which I think is all of you, this is what we used to call a real paper map, or it was a little car atlas that I used to carry in my beat up Chevy Nova. Milwaukee back then was known as a beer town, and I think that's where my love of beer originated. But shortly after being born there, 6 months later, my family moved to Michigan. And for those of you who are from Michigan, you know the ham thing. So it's right around here where Saginaw is. And Saginaw was a GM town growing up. This is my family. Probably about 20 years ago, I think. This is my mother. She was a homemaker. My father was a surgeon. He's now retired. He was a colorectal surgeon. This is my sister. She is the oldest and clearly the smartest. She was brilliant, went to MIT, was literally a rocket scientist, and is still working out in California as an aerospace engineer. This is my brother Chuck and his wife Gemma. Chuck works in the IT business. And then this is the clonal part. So believe it or not, I'm an identical twin. And I like to put the parentheses evil there, and you'll understand why in a second. But my brother John, this is when we were in college. We went to the same college together, as you'll see. And this is his now wife, but back then fiance. This is, I don't know, again, probably about 15 or 20 years later. So identical twins are clones, right? We have the exact same DNA, and yet you will see how different random hits in our lives led us down very different career paths. So what I'd like to say, when we were 2, we were still clonal. We hadn't really had any hits. My mom tried to dress us in different colors, but I'll be truthful with you, I don't know which one is me and which one is my twin brother, John. My mom says she can tell, but I'm pretty sure she's lying. In high school, we were still clonal as well. And so this is a good friend of ours, Jen. Now, people always ask me, do you guys share girlfriends? Which is really gross and an unusual question. And the answer is no. We were just all really good friends. The reason I put this in here in particular is because it turns out, and I'm saying this with permission, that my friend was actually a BRCA2 mutation carrier, which meant that she found out because she got breast cancer at a very early age in her 30s. And it was only years later that I found this out. We kind of lost touch. And then she said, wait, you're a breast cancer doctor and researcher? So it was a little bit weird how we came full circle with that. But yeah, this was in high school. And again, still pretty clonal. We hadn't had many events that had separated us. And in fact, in anticipation of going to Chicago, we both went there at the same time. That's when we first started to differentiate, if you will. So Chicago, for those of you who don't know, is a really tough school. It loves that reputation of beating on its own, particularly the pre-meds. I think it's gotten a little better. I visited there and gave an alumni talk a few years ago, and it certainly seemed a lot better. But back then it was a real grind. And what occurred to me is my brother, who decided to go into business, had a lot more free time than I did as a pre-med. And we had a lot of lab work to do. For those of you who have done OChem and basic science labs, you know that there's, and physics labs, you have additional lab hours. And at Chicago, you didn't get any extra credit for that. That was part of the course. You got the same number of credits as you did if you took a course in economics that met twice a week. So I thought that was a little bit weird and strange, but I chose this path, and so that's what I ended up doing. At Chicago, I really got involved with research, and that's ultimately what led me to go down the route of an MD Ph.D. And so I worked in a tumor immunology lab in the lab of Hans Schreiber, who's still very active actually at the University of Chicago. And I really just felt like this was what I wanted to do. Marry research with being a clinician and really try to do something in the field of cancer, particularly tumor immunology. And so I was lucky enough to get accepted into Penn's, University of Pennsylvania's MD PhD program. And this was really like the first time my twin brother and I really started separated. We actually lived apart. In college, we shared a dorm with 2 other people, and we really did start to separate then. Again, my twin met his fiance, now wife. I had all these lab friends, which I know sounds geeky, but it's true. And for those of you who worked in labs know what I'm talking about. And then these were my med school friends. And you can see here, we're celebrating after finals and we're drinking, beer from a bottle. And this is my twin brother, and he's already married at this point. And he completed his MBA, started in mutual funds, and this was a penthouse apartment that they shared in downtown Chicago. And their choice of libation is a little bit more expensive than mine. For those of you who own pets, I think you'll understand this. For those who don't, you may not, but when you become a pet owner, they're kind of like your kids. And so the first time I ever had a pet was in medical school. This is my first cat pet, and it was a cat named Hercules. And then soon his little brother Socrates was to follow. And so I felt like that when I got this guy, I needed to get another one because I was going to go back to med school and do all these clinics, and I wouldn't be home as much. So I thought they would keep each other company, but it turns out you just feel twice as guilty, and they never really got along anyways. In medical school, I had another transformative hit, and that was my clinical skills teacher, Maurice Addy, was actually killed. And this was the first time I'd ever known anyone in my life that I was close to that had died. And Maurice was 45 at the time, looking at that obituary, and he was just this wonderful teacher. Everyone loved him. You guys have probably had mentors and role models in your life already that are like this. And this was a huge blow. And he was an amazing teacher. He taught me second-year medical skills or clinical skills in second-year medical school, and really taught me the value of teaching and how important it was to be a teacher, educator, and mentor. And because of that, I really felt like I was gonna, at some point in my career, really also gravitate towards teaching. This is my wife, now actually ex-wife, that'll come later as well. She was an MD PhD student a few years junior to me at Penn. She was in the same lab. You guys, if you've worked in labs, already know labs are pretty incestuous places. But I met Rachel, back in 1992 or something like that. And eventually we got engaged and married and had a daughter, which comes up next. Another thing that dramatically affected my life during medical school and graduate school, this is my best friend at Jay Chawla. He's now a world famous physician scientist, endocrinologist out on the West Coast. And this was his wife. And Ingrid was just this lovely individual who, unfortunately, on Christmas Eve, they were riding back home from the hospital. He was on a surgical rotation, and they were hit by a drunk driver. Oh, I forgot to mention my friend Maurice was also killed by a drunk driver. And so, again, in the span of less than 2 years, maybe it was a year, 2 very close friends of mine passed away. And it was just one of these things that taught me life is too precious. We never know when we're going to die. And this is kind of what you deal with being a physician, particularly as an oncologist. So as painful as these experiences were, I think they really helped me grasp with the notion that none of us have a guarantee in life and that we really have to live life to its fullest and think about here and now and do what we want to do in terms of impacting others' lives for the better. All right, so I did my MD PhD, stayed on for Penn for residency. My wife at the time was still in medical school, and I started my clinical fellowship training there. And that was a really, really tough year, but it was also a really rewarding year in terms of how I learned to be an oncologist and how I learned to talk with patients about death and dying. This is a patient of mine, again, with permission, and a good friend. And she was, I think, in her 30s. She's only 6 years older than me when we first met, my first weekend on call on the leukemia unit. And she's a nurse, and she came in with acute leukemia, which back then was pretty much a death sentence. And one of the things I learned from this instance and this series of episodes was that what we say to patients really matters. The example I use is there was at one point, she had gone through a lot, transplant, she lost part of her lung from a fungus infection, and I saw her in follow-up and she was very, very depressed. And I saw her 3 months later and she seemed to be much better. And I said, Elaine, what was it? What was the difference? And she said, it's something you told me, Ben. And I said, forgive me, but I don't remember exactly what that was. And she said, you said, Elaine, you have to keep living your life because you're the only reason I believe leukemia is a curable disease. And sadly, she is the only patient I had that was diagnosed with acute leukemia that survived during that period. But it really struck me that what we do as clinicians, physicians, cancer researchers, and doctors matters. I mean, this is what it's all about, is to really try to help our patients. Saw a lot of death and dying that year, and this is the one kind of shining example that still sticks in my brain. With that, I ended up going to Johns Hopkins. My postdoctoral fellowship was in 1998 and 2001 in the laboratories of Bert Vogelstein and Ken Kinsler. For those of you who don't know, Bert Vogelstein is like the most world famous cancer researcher and geneticist in the world, and has made so many seminal contributions. I've lost count. But he really, and Ken, his first graduate student, or maybe second graduate student, who eventually co-ran the lab with him, they really impacted me in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. I think prior to going there, I really thought it was about being the biggest name possible and having all these Science, Cell, Nature papers like these guys do. But in fact, Bert actually, to this day, still says his primary focus is to cure cancer. And to me, after coming off that tough clinical year, that seemed really ludicrous, or at least unattainable. And I asked him once, I was like, do you really believe that? And he said to me, you know what, Ben, if you and I are not the types of people who are going to try to cure cancer, then who the hell is going to? And that really stuck with me. And again, solidified and crystallized my thinking that being a mentor and an educator is incredibly important. And nothing else that you all take away from this is, when you embark on your careers, whatever it may be, think big and think about how you can change the world, and not just do something that affects you as an individual. It's great if you can do that too, but this really taught me that, we're here for a larger purpose, or at least I like to believe so. So that was my hit number 8. During this time, my twin makes partner. His firm gets sold and he makes his first fortune. I then, even though I never thought I'd stay at Hopkins and Baltimore for as long as I did, and I was supposed to be there for 3 years and move forward, I ended up joining the faculty in 2002. This is my lab's first Christmas dinner, and it's kind of artificially numbered because really it was just Keith, a part-time medical student, an undergraduate, Benita, part-time graduate student, Sabrina, and a tech, Brian, and this is my ex-wife, and this is Brian's wife. So we had a lot of fun. It was great starting a lab on your own, and even though it was tough, it was one of those rewarding things and jobs, for me at least, that I could ever think about, and still remains to that day. My twin brother at this point quits his job and becomes a hedge fund manager in San Francisco. For those of you who don't know what a hedge fund is, don't worry, neither did I, and I'm still not sure, even though he's explained it to me 3 times. We bought a new house in Baltimore, and I don't know, that's the first house you ever buy. Some of you may have already experienced this. You really feel like you're putting your roots down, and that's why I put it up here, because I never really equated buying a house with feeling like you're, I don't know, somehow settling in and being part of the city, part of the community. But you really, at least for me, it really felt like that was what happened when we bought that house. These are my cats. Unfortunately, Hercules developed diabetes and passed away. Ironically, Socrates had a sarcoma and passed away. That was a vaccine site associated sarcoma. And so we also got during that time this little cat named Teeny. Believe it or not, Teeny is still with us. She's an immortal. She's 16 years old and is literally my oldest child. And then my daughter was born, Sophia, who was actually just with me but left this weekend. She's now in high school and she's boarding back in Baltimore. Although with COVID, she's doing online. If you ever have a kid, you'll understand that, this is probably counts for more than just one hit, but probably more like 10. But this is my daughter growing up. And again, clearly these are older photos since she's now 15. And this is my stepson, which comes at a later point. So during this period, my lab grows. This is hit number 13. This is one of my favorite pictures. We thought it'd be cool to get black lab coats. And then my postdoc, Abdi, after we got him, said, you know what, we look like a hair salon, which was really true, but that became like our thing. And yeah, this was a great time watching the lab just grow and do amazing things. My twin makes a second fortune and donates money to the lab at the time. And in 2007, we bought this new house, which I literally just sold about a month ago. And this was something that, again, you just feel like you're putting roots down. I love showing this and telling this story how at this time, my twin in San Francisco also builds a new house, which is just slightly bigger and more expensive, especially with this fancy schmancy pool overlooking the bay. And then in 2010, that was a year to remember. So this was the year that I actually got divorced. I'll spare you the details of this. This is my daughter in the backyard when she was about 4 or 5, the lab in the basement. And that was an exceedingly difficult period of my life. I had a lot of therapy, had a great shrink who helped me get through this. And I also had a great friend who had gone through a similar divorce a year earlier, and that's now my current wife. I've been told to say my final wife, Paula Hurley. So Paula is now also an associate professor here at Vanderbilt University. She came with me from Hopkins. And this is my stepson, Gibson, when he was about 3. That's me, obviously much younger, about 10 years ago. And my daughter at the time was about 5. In 2013, we got married. So we are a blended family. This was our wedding celebration. And then, even though I resisted getting any more pets, my wife has always been a dog lover. I've loved dogs, but I know they're a lot more work. And so for those of you who have dogs, you know what I'm talking about. But we first got Mac. My wife's mom passed away. She's about 6 years ago. And I finally gave in because I knew it meant the world to her to have a dog. And she named it after her mother's maiden name, McQueen. I can't remember for sure. But 3 years later, the kid said, well, Dad, we have Mac, we got to get cheese. And I said, there is no way in hell we're getting cheese. But sure enough, we got cheese. And in fact, maybe I can, let's see, stop the share just for a second. And you can change. These are the laziest dogs. I don't know if you can see that. Cheesy. All right, so much for that. Maybe I'll go back to The Simpsons and share the screen. Oops, I won't make you go all the way back. There we go. So they're here now. They survived the trip from Baltimore to Nashville and they love it. When I was being recruited, I actually love Johns Hopkins, I still do. And even though Vanderbilt made us great offers, it was still a tough choice. And then in 2018, I got into this horrific car accident, high speed on the highway, nearly lost my life. And it kind of reminded me what I was telling you all earlier. We get one shot at life. And in some ways, it has made me not fearful of risks. And to me, that was kind of the wake-up moment. I was going to get one chance to make a bigger impact on what I could do in my lifetime for cancer patients. And so I decided with my wife that was it. We were going to do it. We're going to take the plunge. It was going to be tough and painful to get over that activation energy of moving, et cetera. But out with the old, in with the new. Got a new car. Insurance covered most of it. My family moved, and we have been very happy ever since. So I got here in 2018. At the end of 2018, my wife and stepson followed shortly thereafter, about less than a year afterwards. And now we're moved in and really just loving the place. So in the conclusion, for those of you who don't know this great movie called Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks, I'd encourage you to watch it. But he has this line that says, my mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And then my own kind of takeaway conclusion is life is really defined by random hits, but like cancer mutations, they can help us grow, but unlike cancer in good ways. And with that, we have 3 minutes left for questions. If questions are allowed, I'm going to let Beth kind of moderate that, or someone else besides me. Thank you.
Wow, Ben, thank you so much. I think that's a huge life lesson. Is life is a whole bunch about what your surroundings are, you know, in addition to what you make of it in combination. So I think unless anybody, I'm looking at the chat and I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, here we
one.
go. Great question. I see. How were you motivated to keep going after each hit in life? That's a great, that gets perseverance. Please share with everybody.
I am, you guys can probably tell this, not shy. And I'm not shy about revealing painful things because I think it actually helps others if they're going through it, and it certainly helps me. And so I have always been a big believer and fan of seeking out mental well-being and health. And you know, my shrink once told me that the amazing thing about you, Ben, is that you're always a help giver. And most people who are help givers aren't good at taking help or even seeking it. And he said, but you actually did that. You knew how tough this divorce was going to be on your life, or the close friends who died, and you decided that, you know, you needed help. Despite the fact that our society still has some social stigma attached to it, I find it enormously helpful to speak about it, to actually tell people use it. It's no different to me than if you have cancer and you need treatment. If you have mental issues that you're dealing with, there's no reason you need to do it alone.
Awesome. Excellent point. One other person, Tia, asked, do you spend more time in clinic or doing research? Great question.
Nowadays, I spend more time sitting on my butt in front of a computer all day. And that was even before the COVID pandemic. But technically speaking, I do more research than I do clinics. And so most physician scientists at some point kind of figure out some sort of balance. And I think it's different for every person. So for me, I do a half a day a week of breast cancer clinic and about 3 to 4 weeks of inpatient. And that's usually enough to keep me still dangerous, I like to say. And there's one question here, Beth. Whoops, I just lost it.
Yeah. We'll do just one or two more. What do you see as the unique role of a physician scientist as opposed to an MD? Great question. As opposed to an MD who might do research. So an MD could do research as well.
Yep. So I don't actually think there is really a difference. I tell folks who are interested, who are MDs only doing laboratory research at least, that there are no shortcuts in our business. So most people, and in fact, I've trained fellows like this, most people who are really serious about lab science, but have an MD only, will take the time to actually get almost a PhD equivalent, because that's really what it takes. If you're going to succeed, you have to show that you have the chops to do so by grants, publications, etc. So the metrics are all the same. For me, I thought formal graduate student training really was, one, fun, but then two, was also a time where you really got to learn and be the expert in your field. And so I think it's a wonderful experience to get a PhD. Is it necessary to do biomedical research? No, clearly. My boss, Bert Vogelstein, is a classic example that he's an MD only. But I also think it really helps me personally, even in how I think about patients when I'm actually seeing them. You just learn to think more about problem solving than about rote memorization or regurgitation, which is mostly what med school is about.
And this is a great follow-up to that. So why did you decide to do the MD PhD combination?
Well, I'm a bit of a masochist. No, but I actually think everyone makes their own choices for personal reasons, I think. And for me, I wanted to get the formal training in medical school as well as the PhD training. And I kind of went back and forth. Sometimes I felt like I may just do science and never see a patient again. And some MD PhDs do that. And then other times I just felt like I love this so much, I will never give up seeing patients. I never thought, though, I would ever be 100% clinical. I just love lab work and the stimulation of science too much. And so for me, it was a personal choice. It just was the right fit for me.